how did you meet your husband?
In September 1970, I drove up to, I was living in Forest Gate, that's right, teaching in the London Borough of Newham. And I drove up to Rochdale, to where my parents were living, and from there we drove up towards Scotland. We were going to stay with my brother and his family, who lived in, he was in RAF Kinloss, and he had 3 children. And we broke our journey overnight somewhere, and then we went into, we stopped, the next stop was at Pitlochry, and the Highland Games were on. So my mother, father and I normally would picnic, but because it wasn't a very nice day, we went into this restaurant. We found this place called the Old Mill, and we went in, and the Highland Games were on. So the arrangement was that my father and I would then go around the Highland Games after lunch, and my mother would go around the shops. So we went in, and my mother and I weren't speaking to each other. That's quite usual, actually. And we sat down, and we had a table for 4, and there was a queue. So the waitress came up and she said, "Do you mind if somebody joins you at the table?" Well, I wasn't speaking to anybody, but my mother said, "No, that's fine." So along came Tony. He'd been on holiday in Scotland for a week. What happened to him? The week before he went off to Scotland, he went by train from Brentwood up to Pitlochry, and then he joined a coach party. And the night before he left for his holiday, a Salvation Army officer called at his maisonette and said, "Thank you for giving money to the Salvation Army. This is a nice place you've got. We're not meant to live in ones, we're meant to live in twos and families." So he said, "Get down on your knees and we'll pray for a wife for you." So Tony said, "All right." So in the kitchen, they knelt on the they knelt down on the lino, and off went Colonel Hobson. And Tony said to God, "I'm going away tomorrow. Can I meet my wife in the next week?" So he did, actually. Anyway, he sat at this table. It was an oblong one, and I was at the far end. And God said to him, "That's the one." Well, I was not a believer, but Tony got talking to, my mother got talking to Tony about the Methodist Church, both in the Methodist Church. My mum would never go anywhere else, nowhere else but the Methodist Church. So he assumed wrongly that I was a Christian, you see. So we had our lunch, and then my mother went off round the shops, and Tony attached himself to my father, and my father talked to him about football. Tony knew nothing about football at all. So we walked round the Highland Games. I hadn't spoken to him at all, Tony. And we were leaving, and Tony passed me the programme for the Highland Games and said, "Could I have your name and your phone number?" We could meet up in London. He by that time realised that I lived near London. And then I said, "All right." I'd not got the slightest interest in him at all, because I was never ever going to get married. But I wasn't interested in him anyway. But I thought, it's somebody to go around with. So when I'd been back, I was away a fortnight, he met me in Holborn, and he took me in a church on a Saturday afternoon. I thought, this is a bit weird. There was nobody in the church at all. So he went to the bookstall and he said, "Would you like to read this book? A Woman Needs God." I said, "No, this woman does not need God. I does not read books like that." She said, "Oh." He said, "Well, I'll buy it anyway." I said, "Well, please yourself." So I didn't accept it, of course. So the following week he met me, again in Holborn, I think. I remember we went up the monument, and he said, would you like to meet my parents?" I said, "No, no, I would not like to meet your parents." So he said, kept talking about Jesus, and that freaked me out. So he said, "Jesus is alive." I said, no, he died 2,000 years ago. I went to Sunday school, you didn't. I know he died. I said, if he was alive, they'd have told me at Sunday school. I went to Sunday school when I was 15. I don't remember that being mentioned. So he kept going on about Jesus, so I couldn't stop him. So I said, "I'm a communist." He said, "You're not, are you?" Well, I wasn't, but it stopped him briefly. So he cried actually. And he went back and he told his friends that were praying, she's not a believer. He said, that's your job, Margaret, and that's your job, Tony. You've got to pray for her till she becomes a believer. I didn't know any of this was going on, you see. So the following Sunday or whenever, I'm driving the car to Wheel Park. I'm all relaxed and we're going for a walk and no problem, until he said, I prayed for a wife and you're the one. So I did an emergency stop. I switched off the ignition and all my insides seemed to go round and round, and I was really worried. So I said, no, I didn't pray for a husband. I said, you can't pray, you just pray for people to get well and be blessed, not a wife. He said, Brother Andrew did. I said, who's he? Don't tell me, I don't want to know. So I thought, I'm just totally out of my depth. And he's talking to God. I didn't even really know whether God existed. I thought he might do. And I thought, well, all right, Margaret, I'll go back to my flat. I had this bed sit in Forest Gate, and I'll have a word with God if he exists. And I thought, I think I'm losing my marbles here a bit. But I thought, if God exists, I better be polite, because he's important, and he means well. He's got it wrong, but he means well. So I started with my polite bit, and I said, hello, God, this is Margaret. I thought he needed to know that, didn't he? Yeah. So I said, hello, God, this is Margaret. Thank you for taking an interest in me. It's very kind of you. And I said, I know Tony needs a wife. I'm not the one. My plans don't include marriage. So will you find him someone else, please? Goodbye. I thought, goodbye. And this was on the 12th of September I met him, and on the 6th of December I became a Christian. Because I kept meeting all these people who were talking about Jesus, you know. He sort of came out of the woodwork or something. And he came to see me from the office one evening. And I said, oh, by the way, this was the 6th of December 1970. I became a Christian this morning at 9:30. He said, you did? I said, yeah, I did. And he said, I need a Bible. He said, oh. I said, yeah, I need a Bible. And I said, well, I want to go to church. He said, you don't go to church. I said, I do now. I didn't, I do now. And he said, I said, and I'll read that book you got. Well, he thought, I better take it somewhere lively. So he took me to St Helen's Church in Bishopsgate the following Sunday. And I went down into this church. We'd been praying for centuries, and I'd got such an encounter with the Holy Spirit. And I knew, no matter where I went in the whole world, I would never, ever be alone, you see. Well, I loved the service, and we went to the back afterwards, and they had tea and coffee in little cartons, and Tony's leaning against a pillar. So I said, you know, the St Helens have got a conference at Ashburnham in January. I said, I'm going there. He said, you know what you're talking about? I said, I've been a Christian 6 days, and I am going to that conference. And he just slid down the pillow and sat on the floor. He said it'd be very challenging. It was. So I did go to this conference, and it was very challenging. And one of the team there was a medical missionary, I think. They called him Dr. Ken Moyner, and he used to talk to the students from Barts and so on. And every time he spoke, and he spoke a lot that weekend, every time he spoke I cried. He sort of got hold of my heartstrings and seemed to bring them out like that. And so we got to lunchtime, and it finished in the middle of the afternoon, and I said, I can't take any more, Tony. He said, no, neither can I. So we left. And we started going to St Helen's Church on Sundays. And whenever he headed for the pulpit, I reached for my tissues. And I said, he's preaching again today. Yes. Anyway, Tony told him about this. I was supposed to be getting married. Oh, it was his idea anyway that he'd get married. So he said, I'll come to your wedding. But he didn't actually. He died. He got pancreatitis. He died. And I didn't actually marry Tony till 3 years later.
Wow.
It was an on-off relationship, mostly off. It was mostly off. And I disappeared out of his life. And he was in this missionary, and I, meanwhile, was teaching in Newham. And I didn't want to teach in Newham anymore, so I bought a house in Cranham. And he found out where I was. He kept in touch with St Luke's Church, where we'd gone from time to time. And he was praying, the vicar was. So I hadn't seen him for months. And I was up at the caravan and went to Little Methodist Church with my parents. And the speaker was speaking to me directly all the time. And I'm arguing with him in my mind. And he said, God said, go and see Tony. So I said, no, Lord. So he said, go and see Tony. I said, no, Lord. He won't want to see me. Go and see Tony. So in the end I said, all right. So we went to Brentwood. And Tony's in his back garden talking to a neighbour over the fence. And I was so embarrassed. I hadn't seen him for months. So I didn't know what to say. So I said, I brought my mum and dad to see you. He said, oh, that's nice. Let's have a cup of tea. That's the answer to everything. So we went indoors and he showed me his photograph of the Scilly Isles, you see. So off we went, my mum, father, and I. And then he rang me up. And he said, can we meet? I thought, I don't want to meet. I don't want any more turmoil in my life. So in the end I said, yes. This was 1973, about April. And we sat on the perimeter fence round Wheel Park and said, let's get married soon before I change my mind. And we did.
And you were married how long?
Eh?
How long were you married?
Over 40 years, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't do to rush these things, does it? I think I'll leave it at that. I think that's enough. But when at his funeral I said I had an arranged marriage, and people went, I said, arranged by God. It was, certainly was. He was a lovely man.